think unicorns really started with Jilly. I had an idea and went to her and said, could she make a white heart, like the Dartington White Heart? And she said no, which was great because it made me go back and look at what the possibilities were. And I found in Robert Graves' The White Goddess that the white heart and the unicorn were the same kind of symbolism. So I went back to Jilly and said, I think we'll have a unicorn. And this was the first one that she made in 1985. And ever since that, I always thought I was looking for them, but I think sometimes they're kind of looking for me. So that's really where it all started, and I've worked with images of unicorns ever since. The latest book, I've done several, but the latest one is a book with Jilly, who's designed the enamel panel and made it, and it's inlaid in silver by Joe Gazy and set with moonstones, and it's inlaid into alum tooled goat skin. But it's a modern alphabet for unicorns, really inspired by the medieval books of ours and the wonderful books that have been produced in the past. And it really begins because I also am a letterpress printer, and I print on a very old 1895 Arab press. I wanted to use this beautiful alphabet, which is probably Victorian. It's letterpress, and the actual letters are in copper on the top, and they did print actually very beautifully. And the title page is very plain. Again, it's using a nice typeface. This is called Fry's Ornamented. And there's a little gold unicorn on the title page, really inspired by the beautiful golden cockerel press books, because quite often they had a little gold cockerel on the title page, and I thought if they can have gold cockerels, I'll figure out a way of doing gold unicorns. And then there's just a little introduction about how unicorns have always had to adapt to being hunted and killed for their magical horn or the precious jewel beneath it. And then I love the folk song by Bill Caddick about unicorns being always there, and we need to look for them. In the alphabet, they've had mixed fortunes, but they have been remarkably resilient. The preface on the idea of how we see the alphabet is written by a friend of mine, Roy Harris, who's a professor of linguistics, and it just sort of says really that the alphabet in the following pages is rather a late version of the set of letters derived from Latin forebears in turn of Phoenician origin. And he finishes up saying, letters, like other public signs, reflect no more than the society that they serve. So it's a little introduction about how we see the alphabet. And there's a little introduction of what the letters actually stand for in my particular alphabet. And the first one is A, obviously. We didn't start designing them at A. They were designed completely at random through the alphabet, beginning with O, and the last one, which was the hardest one, was B. The biodiversity, which we'll come to next, was actually the hardest to design. This is a passage from the Old Testament where Nahum, who's a minor prophet that nobody sort of reads, is talking about Assyria and the ancient Assyrians. The typeface on this one is an American typeface called Old Glory, where it's the stars and stripes. And America were obviously the first landing on the moon. And you can allegedly buy chunks of the moon now as real estate, as a speculation. The balance is held by, this is a salmon, a GM salmon, on a bed of GM rice that's genetically modified, and the locust is just contemplating what it should eat. There is a star sign called the Monoceros, which is a unicorn. There is a star constellation called the unicorn, and this is just a branding iron of a footprint on the moon. This is the hardest one that I had to design. The artist Norman, or the illustrator, was brilliant. I used to go in with terribly scruffy little drawings and say, I've got this idea, Norman, and he'd go, oh, how can I make an illustration? This was the last letter we designed. Perhaps it's appropriate because biodiversity, as we understand it, is the most complex issue there is. And the little quote is by E.O. Wilson, who says about, we haven't even begun to understand the bacteria in the soil, let alone anything else. The illustration is about the biologists look at what are called keystone species. So obviously in this rather rickety arch that's obviously of some former nicer building, the unicorn is actually the keystone species. The people that study the biochemistry say that under a electron microscope, the little animals almost play rainbow jazz. And then there's the big biodiversity treaty is being discussed under something called Article 19, definitions and amendments, and it's all done by sort of lawyers discussing bits and pieces. And this is the little rat that actually the sacrament's been knocked over, and the little rat is nibbling actually at the biscuits, and it's set against the idea of Pandora's box. And in the background is a little tornado which reflects the idea, sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. And you've got you've got the tropical rainforest with its parrots, you've got the little bats for the cave, and you've got the musk ox for the Arctic regions, and all the other regions. And the plant that's coming out is a vine. And the swan's fairly self-evident. The second one, or the third one, is communications. The quote is from Helena Norberg Hodge, who's done a lot of work in Ladakh and seen how Ladakh has been transformed by westernisation. This is the little, in the sea, the little pixels are breaking up. Machu Picchu has got its listening posts. It's been invaded by tourists in the helicopter. When the American West was opened up, the buffalo were killed in huge numbers, and there's terrible images of piles of bones of the buffalo that were killed. And the staple crop in the Andes are potatoes, and they're freeze dries. They're trodden out, and then overnight they're freeze dried potatoes is a staple crop. Machu Picchu was one of the it was discovered by a man, rediscovered by a man called Hiram Bingham, who sort of dug it out in this century. And one of the things that was important to the Inca was the hitching post of the sun, where they could tell the shadow. So in this one, this is the hardest unicorn to find because he's just a little shadow under the hitching post of the sun. D. This is dreams. If there were dreams to sell, merry and sad to tell, and the crier rang the bell, what would you choose? What would you choose as your dream? This is the desert island, lots of people's idea of a dream. There's a little Dartington donkey in there with the garland round his neck. This is a Dartington glass decanter with a lovely little glass unicorn in. The dodo's in a cage thinking, once I did live on a kind of nice desert island like that. And this is was a British submarine called HMS Unicorn, and I've been lucky enough to know the captain of HMS Unicorn. And although this isn't a nuclear submarine, it's now been sold to the Canadians. Of course, we did actually atomic test on some of these lovely little desert islands. E is really for education. And obviously the scribe has had to succumb to modern technology because the little unicorn's on the television screen. The books in the background represent lots of different cultures of the book. These are Asian, these are sort of cuneiform tablets, the Jewish Torah, and various other traditions of the book, because the book is not just this type of book, the Western book. And then the little unicorn is in the garden with all its things in the garden. This one is food. There are huge issues around food at the moment. Lots of our food is still based on slavery. These eating all the goodies of the medieval concept, the ship of fools. The unicorn is hung as a butchered carcass. There's Dolly, the genetically engineered sheep. This is one of the high-tech laboratories that are doing work with GM, and the poor little bee doesn't know which crop it should be pollinating, whether it should be pollinating crops without genetically modified plants or not, because it doesn't decide the boundaries it travels. F, G. This is one of my favourites. This is Gaia theory, a phrase really coined by a man called James Lovelock. And he also did a computer modelling theory where the Earth was populated by black and white daisies. And he introduced rabbits into this computer model that ate the black and white daisy. So I love Alice's white rabbit. And the White Cliffs of Dover are made of single-celled little organisms that have, over the period of time, sunk to the bottom of the ocean and then risen again. And so they say it's atmosphere locked up in solid things. Nitrogen is made by lightning. So we couldn't really, it's very important, lightning. And the little unicorn is expression really is a tribute to Thurber's lovely story of the unicorn in the garden. History, sadly, we don't seem to learn anything very much from history. This is obviously the nuclear cloud. This is a tribute to Nash's painting of the Menin Road. And when printing came along about 400 years ago, they realised what a revolution it was, from previously books and things just being handwritten by scribes, that they could produce many copies. And there is I've not been able to quite trace the quote, and it's debatable whether it should be 25 or 26, but I stuck with 25 because you could always say it's a typographical error and you should read your copy more carefully. There are always typographical errors, no matter how carefully you try. And so the printing press was quite a force for change, but the unicorn's quite fed up with always having to leave some war zone or other. There's no kind of sort of peace anywhere. This one is the phoenix that rises from the ashes, and you have various sort of plants. You have pomegranates and mistletoe and irises, all for immortality. And the little unicorn here is like you get those beautiful flies and ants entombed in amber. The little unicorn's in a piece of amber. J, yeah, I'm kind of fond of this one as well. This is J for Jester. This is an alchemical flask. I've got a great friend who's an alchemist. I don't know much about chemistry and alchemy. And this is that really the quote is, in the 20th century, humankind has begun to play dice with the planet without knowing all the rules of the game. So this is childhood. The little unicorn's the rocking horse. This is the Kabbalah. And I used the passion flower because it's got quite a lot of religious significance. And Norman's just wonderful at drawing these kind of little creatures that do pop out from time to time. So it's, you know, we're playing the game with the dice, but we don't really know the rules that we're playing with. This is kleptomania. We're not quite sure where this one came from, really. I think Norman said, he rang me up and said, I've had this inspiration in the library this morning. I don't know what you'll think of it. And this is really, we sort of collect everything. The star was always seen as some kind of omen. And I had one of the great plant kleptomanias was collecting orchids. And I had a great friend who was a Franciscan priest, the Reverend Crutwell, who collected in Papua New Guinea, wonderful man. And this is an orchid called Dendrobium crutwellii. He's got about 6 plants named after him, but that's the orchid. And and that's what really about, we just collect things or we put them in the bank. And this is another plant-based one because that's one of my previous lives. This is Linnaeus, who was a Swede who went around classifying just about everything with Latin names. And this is his little plant, Linnea borealis. And I've got a great friend who's a taxonomic botanist, and the first drawing I had, he went, it won't do, and I went, oh, I don't know why. And he said, it's always got two flowers on the top of the spike. So the unicorn's out at night, he's usually out at night, and he's obviously looking in the second-hand book at Linnaeus's System of Nature, and he realises he's not being classified. I mean, he's not kind of unhappy about it, but he's just kind of making the point that he's nowhere in the classification. Mining, this one's for mining. Mining's a very destructive thing to indigenous peoples. The setting is Tikal in Guatemala, one of these wonderful ancient cities that was discovered. The little unicorn is the pit pony, pulling out whatever, probably coal in this case. And the little plant is a wonderful type of, I think they're bryophytes, and it aligns itself on walls of dark caves or mine workings. And I have seen it twice, and it aligns on the wall with the light, and it is just luminous. It's an absolutely fantastic little plant, very small, and once you've seen it, you never forget it. This is about noise pollution in the oceans. Beginning with these wonderful deep volcanic trenches at the bottom of the ocean, and all these little things do exist at the bottom of the ocean in complete darkness, in these hydrothermal vents that are enormously hot, well, incredibly hot. It melts. The little submarine that's been down to see them melts if you get too close. And all this little life form is living at the bottom of these deep volcanic trenches. The poor old bigger mammals that are a bit further up, nearer the surface, a lot of them are becoming deaf because of all this sonic testing and tankers and things. Then I have a great friend on the next layer. This is a little ice bridge in Antarctica, and she sailed under that. I mean, it could have collapsed at any time because it's kind of fragile. And the actual typeface is called Shatter. Took a lot of time picking the typefaces as well. Oh, yeah, this is where we started. This was the first one in the alphabet. This was O for origins, because I love this Stephen Jay Gould book, which is about the Burgess Shell, where they found all these fossils, and it says, perhaps we're only an afterthought, a kind of cosmic accident, just one bauble on the Christmas tree of evolution. And I thought it was kind of nice. And so this is the ginkgo, and the unicorn's just a little bauble hanging from, you presume, a bigger Christmas tree. And I just kind of like the koala bear. I'm not quite sure why, but and I have a friend who's a volcanologist, and when I sent him this, he sent me a whole dissertation about that type of volcano, which I was kind of fascinated by. And this has been a long, this was one that was fairly early on. This is probably number 2, because I lived in Darlington for a long time, and I very rarely stepped out into the real world. And I stepped out into the real world to fight a planning application, and was quite sort of shocked by the real world. And I doggedly plodded on with appeals and pointed out that you can't chop down trees with TPOs on them and things like that. And this is a town fairly near here where there is a zoo, but because of climate change, the pelican is actually living here. He's not particularly escaped from the zoo. The houses are built under the pylons. This beautiful oak tree, which had a TPO on it, is no more. The wolf is lamenting the loss of the unicorn because the bulldozer's driven over it. The poor little baby unicorn sheltering in this big drain pipe with the chainsaw on the top. And the only thing that saved this side up to now is the slow worm under a Schedule 5, the Wildlife and Countryside Act, of which after 2 years of plodding through all the documentation I found out. So the little slow worm's still hanging on in there just. Q? Yeah, Q is about quests. And obviously obviously at the time we were doing this, the biggest, craziest quest there was the boat down at Totnes called Team Phillips, that sadly, well, it may be drifting somewhere in the middle of nowhere, or it may be sunk at the bottom of the ocean. And there's a lovely Chinese story about the monkey that stole the peach from heaven, that he's sitting on Jason's golden fleece, because that was a quest, Jason. There's this wonderful book about the ancient maps that suggest that the South Pole did exist long before we knew it did. This is an acacia which the Aborigines strip the bark and make canoes of. This is a silver birch which the North American Indians strip the bark and make canoes of. And this is a wonderful harp that came from one of the ancient cities. And again, sometimes the quest is for music, so you can play the harp and get the music. And this is St. Christopher, the patron saint of travellers. So I kind of like that one. This was an early one as well. This was religion, and I quite like the quote with this one. The various modes of worship which prevailed in the Roman world were all considered by the people as equally true, by the philosopher as equally false, and by the magistrate is equally useful. And this is, again, I love those ancient cities of the Assyrians, and these all had like little animals and people on the wall. And of course my little horses are unicorns. And there's this lovely passage from Isaiah about your palaces will become courts for owls, because they'll all be in ruins. This one's a bit naughty. This one, everybody sort of sniggers at this one. And this was another quest of mine, really. It was because I happened to find that in the Kama Sutra you have to acquire 64 skills, of which about number 31 or 32 is bookbinding. So I was quite fascinated, and this obviously is sex. And the poor little musk deer has a rough time because his little bits are chopped off to make scent. And hares have often been known to have, you keep a lucky hare's foot. And a lot of people, snakes raise your whole energy level. But I thoroughly recommend the book I took the quote from, which the quote is, "In the East, sex was traditionally regarded as a high art form worthy of respect." And the book is The Alchemy of Ecstasy, and I would recommend anybody to read it. It's an amazing book. And we probably all should be out there looking at our life slightly differently than when we are. But that one shocks some people, but it's something we can't walk away from. And I love this one. This one was time. And this is from a Lyle Watson quote. And somebody did the probability of unicorns actually occurring at all. And it says, but what Cole found to his astonishment, that unicorns were apparently most active at 3 o'clock in the morning on the computer. And this is about time. It's about the Chinese want to build a road into Tibet. When the railways came, they changed perceptions of time. This is one of these sort of swapped watches, and the unicorns at 3 o'clock in the morning. Many plants alter your sense of time. This is Datura. And the little hummingbird's wings beat faster than any kind of little bird that anybody else knows. So it's time. And spiders' webs, they sort of beat time. And this is one of Norman's little pieces about even in old age you can sit on a swing and have a good time. This is unemployed. This really is, I picked unemployed. Norman said it was, it could always see it as being in one of these awful cities pouring with rain, with no job, no home and no money. And the quote is Roy Stryker, who was in charge of an American agency called the Farm Security Administration, where people like Ben Shan, they went photographing America with these classic pictures during the Depression, and the little scapegoat is Home and Hunt's scapegoat. Instead of a scapegoat, it's a little scape unicorn. Next. V. This is Virus. This is, I've been very lucky living at Dartington, because you've had a lot of the people and the lecturers that have written the sort of standard books. And this is Andrew Kimbrell, who's actually written about the intrusion of medical things onto the human body. And this is for virus. This is set in Africa against the Victoria Falls. This is the DNA spiral, which is thought to be much more complicated than we understand. And viruses have these little things that sort of lock on, as I understand it, to the cells. And a friend of mine who's a pathologist says virus is very sneaky, very cunning. So I said foxes, and he said, well, you could. And also one of the plants that always contains a virus, tobacco, has got a mosaic virus. And so that's just really about viruses and the body and how we look at ourselves. Water. This is water. Water is perhaps something that we don't take seriously enough. Traditionally, no animal would drink out of a pool until the unicorn had dipped his horn in to purify it. That's the mythology of them. They've got a spiral horn. This is a sacred lotus set in Egypt against the papyrus. And there was a lot of modern work done by a man called Victor Scharberger about water and how you could improve water quality by going through spirals and vortexes and things like that. X is xenophobia, really about fear of the unknown, fear of strangers. This is really just the unicorn's a little prisoner. You know, people don't understand him. We built walls to keep strangers out, and really he's just kind of in prison. I mean, he's not looking too worried about it. And the tree in that one is Scots pine. And the quote is really from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was killed in a concentration camp in Germany. The unicorn's in a much more restful mood here. He's, I always say he, but there must be she's as well. I don't know where they are. They're even quieter than he's. This is a palace built by a Mughal prince in Himalaya. It must be a beautiful place because the water flows through the palace under this seat. So the unicorn's there doing its yoga and its meditation and thinking about the world and breathing deeply and much more calm and serene. I think Z, the next one, is one of my favourites. This is Norman at his best. This one is for zoo. What kind of zoo are we creating? In the background is the Tower of Babel. You have the mandrake. And this is the curate taking all these little creatures that we've created for a walk. The unicorn, again, is fairly unconcerned among them. And it's just kind of what sort of creatures are we going to create for the zoo in the future. This is Arpad Pushtai, who kept saying, who was a scientist doing genetic research with potatoes, and he kept saying, my rats don't like these potatoes with a snowdrop gene in them. My rats don't like these snowdrop genes in potatoes. And his quote is, we must release scientists from their servitude to big business and state interests, because a democratic society which suppresses academic freedom and the individual writes its own death warrant. And Rosalind Wayne drew that for me. That's just they extracted, I mean, genes are extracted out of all kinds of things and popped into other things now. You're never quite sure what is what. This is just two pieces, one by Gilly, who did the panel, about how she felt about the book, and Norman, who thought we'd probably lost our way, but we kept going. There's a little colophon that says how many there are, of which I'm not quite sure yet, how it was printed, and as I was printing this, we began to have foot and mouth, and I was reading the Black Death, and I think it's probably got some appropriate thought, because it says, the generation that survived the plague could not believe but did not dare deny. It groped myopically towards the future, with one nervous eye always peering over its shoulder towards the past. and then I'm very keen on Edgar Casey, and I finished up with a quote from Edgar Casey which says, "Thy life is not set for purely the material things, for know the earth and all therein is the Lord's. The silver, the gold, the cattle on 1,000 hills are his. He knows thy needs, but thou must choose as what you will do with them, do with thy talents." And that's the book. And then all the reference material, or most of it, or a lot of it, the reference material is bound into one big volume, so that if anybody ever wanted to check the books that were used or the reference material, it's all sort of put in here and can be referred to. I think that's about it.